If you have OCD, you may have noticed that your obsessions and compulsions are all centered around a specific theme. These different themes are called OCD subtypes. In today's video, we're going to be going over all the different OCD subtypes to hopefully help you understand which subtype you may be dealing with. Hey y'all, thanks for joining me again for another video. My name is Bailey and I make content all around my mental and physical health as well as lifestyle content. Now let's get into today's video. So what are OCD subtypes? Although all forms of OCD have symptoms in common, the way these symptoms present themselves from person to person in their daily life are different. Someone's subtype is really just the way their OCD affects them. What does the mind focus on and what thoughts result from this? Subtypes are pretty consistent over time, although sometimes new symptoms can appear and old symptoms can disappear. What are the common OCD subtypes? The first subtype that we're going to get into today is harm OCD. Harm OCD causes people to be very disturbed by the violent, intrusive thoughts that most everyone has. While most people are able to shrug off these thoughts, people with harm OCD can sometimes become completely overwhelmed by them. Now for the obsessions that come with harm OCD. They could be simple thoughts that just come into your mind, such as, I could jump in front of this train right now. I could cut my husband with this knife. What if I drove into that person? And what if I ran over my neighbor's dog and I just don't remember it? And here are a few of the compulsions that the obsession would drive someone with harm OCD to do. Refusing to stand near train tracks. Keeping all knives hidden away somewhere. Repeatedly going back to check to make sure that you didn't run someone over. Checking to make sure you see the neighbor's dog in their yard. These are just a few of the obsessions and compulsions that people with harm OCD deal with on a daily basis. The next subtype that we're going to get into is SO OCD. SO OCD, or better known as sexual orientation OCD, involves obsessions about one's sexuality, such as constantly questioning if you're attracted to the opposite sex when you've always been straight or vice versa. Now let's get into the obsessions. They could be thoughts such as, I was attracted to that girl back there. This must mean that I'm gay. Other people can detect that deep down I'm into women. Was I really into him when we dated, or was I more into girls? Now we'll get into the compulsions that these obsessions drive, such as looking at pictures of men to see if you find them attractive or not. Asking people repeatedly if you seem straight to them. And sometimes even avoiding people of the same sex altogether to avoid confusion. Our next subtype is going to be sexual intrusive thoughts OCD. With this OCD subtype, people experience unwanted sexual thoughts causing them to feel immense fear, guilt, disgust, shame. These intrusive thoughts can be around rape, incest, perversion, a multitude of things. These sexual obsessions are not pleasurable, and OCD sufferers really want for them to go away. Because of the nature of these thoughts, a lot of people who struggle with sexual intrusive thoughts, OCD, don't seek help for fear of being reported or being judged by others. Some of the obsessions that accompany sexual intrusive thoughts, OCD, are extreme fear of being attracted to a family member, animal, dead or inanimate objects, or even sometimes children. Intense fear of committing a sexually heinous act. Extreme fear of becoming violent during sex. The common compulsions that these obsessions drive are avoiding situations altogether where they may encounter or interact with a subject of their intrusive thoughts. Reassuring themselves constantly that they're not capable of these heinous acts and that they're a good person. Replacing unacceptable sexual thoughts with acceptable sexual thoughts. And those are just some of the characteristics of sexual intrusive thoughts, OCD. The next subtype we're going to get into is somatic OCD. Somatic OCD, or sometimes referred to as somatically focused OCD, occurs when OCD sufferers become hyper-aware of bodily sensations such as breathing, heart rhythm, and swallowing. These automatic bodily processes become obsessions for the sufferer. They're often unable to stop thinking about these bodily functions and sometimes will try to distract themselves, but ultimately end up feeling more distress and engaging in more compulsive behavior. The common obsessions that accompany this would be obsessions such as breathing, so focusing on whether their breathing is shallow or deep, and fears about not being able to breathe a certain way. Another one would be blinking. So they constantly are focused on how frequently they're blinking, and sometimes they worry that they won't be able to stop focusing on their blinking. Another one is swallowing. They'll focus on the action of swallowing and fear not being able to swallow. They'll often monitor how frequently they're swallowing as well and worry that they won't be able to stop monitoring how frequently they are swallowing. The common compulsions that these obsessions drive would be attempting to stop noticing and pushing it out of awareness, distracting oneself constantly to stop monitoring, and also ruminating or problem solving how to stop noticing their sensations. The next subtype we're going to get into is relationship OCD. Relationship OCD, it leaves the sufferer completely unable to tolerate the uncertainty of intimate relationships, giving them obsessions about the rightness of their own relationship and countless other possibilities that daily life brings. Now let's get into the obsessions that accompany relationship OCD. A lot of times the thoughts that accompany relationship OCD are thoughts such as, is this the right person for me? Is there someone out there who's a better fit for me? Are we really meant for one another? And also, what if we're not meant to be together, but we still end up stuck with each other? Some of the common compulsions that accompany these obsessions are taking relationship quizzes online to see how compatible they are with their partner, looking up and comparing their relationship to other relationships to see if these other people seem happier than maybe they are, and also constantly replaying the same situations over and over again in their head, such as, did we really have fun together on vacation that one time, or did I just make all that up? These are the obsessions and compulsions related to relationship OCD. The next subtype we're going to get into is just right OCD. Just right OCD is one of the more well-known forms of OCD that you probably hear a lot about in movies and TV shows and bad jokes. Some of the obsessions that accompany just right OCD are, something is just not right with this. I need to start this all over and make it perfect. Some of the compulsions that these obsessions drive would be things such as performing any action over and over again, like closing a door, rearranging, reordering things repeatedly until it feels perfect, and also changing wording many times in emails and notes, text messages, just constantly doubting what you're saying and redoing it over and over and over again until you feel like it's perfect. The next OCD subtype that we're going to get into is also a well-known one, and that is contamination OCD. Now, this is probably the most stereotyped form of OCD subtype out there. People with this subtype are afraid of getting themselves sick or someone that they deeply care about sick. Some common obsessions would be things like, oh no, this time I really do have AIDS, or I just gave my baby sister a serious illness when I just held her, or this whole place is just full of bad bacteria, I can tell. So some of the compulsions that these obsessions drive would be constantly washing hands repeatedly and sanitizing things repeatedly, always cleaning different sources around the house, so just constantly cleaning, constantly doing something revolving around cleanliness, and also by avoiding being in public places such as doctor's offices. The next subtype that we're going to get into is religious OCD. OCD is a subtype that involves a religious, moral, or ethical obsession. These people often have thoughts that something that they thought or did is a sin and that might go against their religion or moral doctrine. People with religious OCD experience frequent worry and guilt about violating a moral or religious ethical code and what that may mean about them as a person. Some of the obsessions that come along with religious OCD are things such as thinking to yourself, have I prayed correctly? Have I prayed for the appropriate amount of time? Another one could be, today I thought my religious leader was ugly. Does that make me a bad person? Another one is, during religious services, I found it really hard to concentrate and kept going back to my to-do list. Is that a sin? Some of the compulsions that these obsessions drive would be things such as excessive prayer. People with religious OCD may pray extensively. So generally, this would be longer than the normal period that someone would sit down and say a prayer. Sometimes they'll do this hundreds of times a day in order to make sure that their prayers have been performed correctly. If there is a mistake or hesitation in their prayer, the sufferer may repeat the prayer again and again until they feel that it's flawless. Another common compulsion would be excessive confession. So people with religious OCD may repeatedly go to their religious leader or authority to ask about or confess sins that they are worried they have committed. It could be a minor question like, was it a sin when I found a woman attractive even though I'm married? The person may return multiple times to confess about the same event for fear that they haven't communicated the sin properly. And another compulsion would be excessive rituals. People with religious OCD may develop excessive rituals to calm their thoughts. This can look like coming up with a certain amount of minutes to pray. I was a bit distracted, so maybe I should do it again just to be sure. Asking for God's forgiveness a certain amount of times, or performing established religious rituals a certain amount of time. Our next subtype is going to be existential OCD. So with existential OCD, or sometimes called philosophical OCD, this is a subtype that focuses on distressing obsessions with existential themes that cause OCD sufferers to chase answers to questions that do not have definite answers or resolutions. This typically will look like questions around the meaning of life, one's purpose, spirituality, life and death. These are all common themes for people who suffer with existential OCD. These people can sometimes be really rigid and spend a lot of time looking for answers to life's more complex questions. Their OCD brain finds it challenging to accept not knowing the answers and moving forward with their life. Common obsessions with existential OCD would be things like, what if I'm not real? What if this world isn't real? What if we're living in a simulation? A lot of the common compulsions that these obsessions drive would be things such as self-reassurance about their fears, seeking assurance from others, checking their behaviors, and also checking to make sure that they are physically here. The next subtype that we're going to get into is pure O OCD. Pure O, or pure obsessional OCD, is one of the murkier subtypes of OCD. Some people claim that it doesn't even exist. So the idea is that people with pure O have obsessions without visible compulsions. But since they still have compulsions, they're not exactly purely obsessional. Regardless if pure O would be considered a true subtype of OCD or not, a lot of people identify with pure O because a lot of times they don't have the more obvious compulsions that we went over previously with some of the other OCD subtypes. So the obsessions with pure OCD can be vastly different. They can be about sex, sexuality, religion, harm, personal health, romance, and really anything else that we've discussed previously already in this video. So some obsessions that people with pure OCD generally suffer from would be questions like, what if I'm actually not a good person? How do I know that life is even worth it? What if I go over there and push that guy off this bridge? If I don't clean my mess good enough, someone will fall and slip and be hurt because of me. The compulsions that these obsessions can drive would be things such as being sure to only spend time with people who tell you that you're a good person, always thinking through the meaning of life question, looking for obvious signs in your mind that you would never actually push someone off of a bridge, and also replaying old situations and conversations in their head from days, months, even years ago. All of these subtypes that we have went over today should give you a better understanding of what people with OCD suffer with daily. Now, we did not cover every single subtype that is out there. That would literally take me about 4 days probably. But I did cover the more well-known ones and the ones that majority of people struggle with in their day-to-day life. Now that we've discussed all of the common OCD subtypes, I'm just going to kind of run down a list of the lesser known OCD subtypes that maybe you haven't heard of or maybe you want to look more into. So one example of a less commonly known OCD subtype would be hit and run OCD. This is characterized by a fear of running someone over while driving. People with this subtype often find that their obsessions make it difficult for them to drive. Or sometimes even it will force them to retrace their route that they just took. Say they're driving to work and they hit a bump in the road, your OCD will convince you that that was the person. And sometimes they will literally leave their office and take the exact route that they just drove to get to their office just to make sure that they didn't accidentally hit somebody and didn't know it. OCD can take hold of the past too. Real events OCD is a subtype characterized by obsessions and compulsions about the person's past. A person with real events OCD may have obsessive thoughts about something that they said to a friend 5 years ago, and they can still be concerned about whether or not they offended them, no matter how long ago this was. Ultimately, OCD subtypes follow the same cycle of obsessions and compulsions as OCD. For some people, it might not be worth working too hard to figure out exactly what someone's subtype is, but for others, it can be comforting knowing that there are other people out there like them and they're not alone. That's all I have for you in today's video. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss new videos that go up weekly. Bye guys! Hopefully I'll see you in a new video next week.